Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am doing kind of the opposite of a video that I did recently where I talked about 6 books that I would rate more highly now than I did at the time because they have stuck with me. And today I'm going to do the opposite of that, of books that I rated relatively highly and now I just they didn't stick with me and they're not ones I would plan on rereading. I did a rating video and in it I talked about how if I rate a book 4 or 5 stars, that probably means that I will reread them at some point. So a 3-star book is usually pretty decent. I enjoyed it, but ultimately didn't leave a lasting impact and would not be one that I would reread. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and dive in here. The first one that I want to talk about is actually probably a little controversial in the Christian fiction community. I don't read a ton of Christian fiction, to be totally honest, because I don't really like Christian romance. It's just too cheesy for me. And then I'm finding, as I have read little bits of Christian mystery / thrillers here and there, most of them are pretty much the same book over and over and over again. And so as a result of that, I find that I get kind of easily bored with them. And so I don't spend very much time reading Christian fiction anymore because I feel like there's not a whole lot of work put into the characters. I feel like a lot of the writing can be kind of subpar. That being said, a couple years ago, I read the If I Run series by Terry Blackstock. I loved Terry Blackstock as a teenager. I remember reading some of her books. And so this newer series was hyped by several Christian booktubers that I love. And so I went ahead and read the first book, and I think I rated it 4.5 or 5 stars. I rated it very highly because it was fast paced and I liked the premise of it. So the premise is basically that this girl goes in and finds her best friend murdered, and as it turns out, she has been framed for the crime, and so she just takes off and she's running across the country. She has disguises and all this kind of stuff, and there's corruption within the police force, and she's trying to figure out exactly what's going on and trying to solve all of this. I remember when I read the first book that I was like, well, this is great. I just wish that there was more character development because I feel like I don't really know the characters at all. And then book 2 was awful, I thought. In my opinion, I didn't like book 2 at all because it followed the exact same formula as the first book. There was no character development and there was totally this savior complex going on that never gets dealt with. Scenes that happen in all 3 books with the main character. And then the last book, the ending of it was just, it was bad, honestly. It was the ultimate of cheesy Christian romances and people that it's you're not in love. You don't even know each other really. I realize that these are very harsh thoughts for people who really love this series because it's really well loved in the Christian fiction community. But if I could go back and rate this first book, I would rate it 3 stars at the very highest because I did have fun reading the first book, but there were things that irked me that never played out or were resolved within the series. And ultimately, it was kind of forgettable. I don't remember either of the characters' names. I just remember her having disguises and that part in the premise kind of being fun, but it felt very empty and fluffy, so it hasn't really stuck with me. Piggybacking off of the mystery kind of genre, although this is not a thriller, is Crocodile on the Sandbank. And this is part of a series. I think it's the first book of the, is it Amelia Peabody series? I can't remember. So basically, this old spinster lady ends up in Egypt. She comes into an inheritance. It's funny, old spinster lady. She's probably in her late 30s, early 40s. But in the time that this is set, that's considered an old spinster. She ends up at an archaeological dig site. There's some mystery. There's some intimidation of a mummy that's coming because they're cursed because of this dig site and all this stuff. And at the time that I read it, it was fun, but I don't know. I think I rated it 4 stars and I would rate it 2.5 or 3 now because it just felt really basic. The mystery was nothing exciting at all. It doesn't even start until halfway through the book. I didn't love the romance. I think lots of people did, but I'm not a big fan of romances in general or falling for the guy that treats you like crap. That is just kind of, to me, I'm why are you falling in love with this guy? And it's like supposed to be this gruff exterior with a heart of gold kind of thing, but it's like, why are you attracted to people who don't treat you well? And like I said, ultimately, I just feel like it was a very forgettable book. I don't think I'll ever reread it. I had found some more books in the series at a library book sale, and I just unhauled them like a couple weeks ago because I'm like, I'm never gonna read these because I don't even have the desire to reread the first book. I think it was one of those things where I was reading it with someone who absolutely loved it, and that kind of influenced me to be like, well, and try to like look at the good things. Sometimes that happens when I'm buddy reading something with somebody and I'm not loving it, but they are. I try to like look for the good things and pick them out, and that kind of can influence my star rating, because when I'm reading a book with someone and they're loving it, I don't want to be like, I don't really like this book that much. The next book I want to talk about is Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day, which I read last summer, and I feel like the ending of this book made it for me, but ultimately I think that this book wasn't what I was expecting. So I think I did give it 4 stars because the ending was really sweet and I really liked it. But overall, the book just wasn't what I was expecting. I mean, it's supposed to be like this old lady, again, old. She's probably in like her 40s. She's not that old. She is going to fulfill this job role as a governess, and she ends up at this rich lady's house, young lady who like wants her help in like concealing these affairs. And there's like drug use, like cocaine use, like at the beginning of the book. And I was like, what is this? It was just really funny because the outside of the book and the premise of the book sounds like it would be like really sweet and heartwarming, and there was just some stuff that was thrown in there that I was like, what? But it was funny, and the end was very, very heartwarming. But ultimately, again, I just felt like it was a forgettable book and not one that I would reread, which is a shame because a lot of people read it last year because it won some sort of National Book Day or something contest that Kate Howe did, where she had a bunch of people like bring books and then they voted for what book they wanted to read together, and Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day won. And so a lot of people read it last summer, but I feel like I was the only one who didn't love it. Everyone else was like, this is so funny, this is so great, I'm done reading it and I can't wait to reread it already. And I'm like, after I finished it, I was like, oh, well, the ending kind of made it. But since I've had time and space from it, it's been almost a year since I've read it, I'm like, the ending didn't feel worth all the parts that I really didn't enjoy. The next book I want to talk about is actually the only V.E. Schwab book that I've enjoyed, and it's Vicious. I've read a couple other books by her and just have not liked them. And Vicious was like almost a perfect book for me. Like, I loved it. Editing Tiffany here. I spoiled a part of this book, so I had to cut out the description, but it's about these 2 college students who have found out about these people who have superhuman abilities, and they're trying to figure out what they can do to get those, and they want to experiment with that. Also, I'm outside, so there are some noises and our air conditioner's on, so it's a little loud, but I had to cut out the entire description because I realized that what I said didn't happen until like halfway through the book or something. So sorry about that. And so I'm pretty sure I rated it 5 stars. And now, again, I think I would rate it 3. Like, it was still a decent book. It was still fun, but there is nothing about that book that has stuck with me. And I think it really tried to kind of talk philosophically a bit about life and death and good and evil and like, what does that really look like? But I don't think it did it successfully, because I've read a lot of books where that's kind of been the premise and they've really stuck with me and made me think for a long time that I'm still thinking about them. And this, unfortunately, just wasn't one of them. There was a sequel that came out and I have zero interest in reading it. And I'm pretty sure it was like my favorite book that I read in like January of last year. All right, it's time to add a classic onto this list. Well, I guess Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day is kind of a classic. It's like more modern classic. The Winter of Our Discontents by John Steinbeck. I like John Steinbeck a lot, but I didn't like this book all that much. And I remember, again, it was the ending that made it, because it's kind of about this guy who feels like he's been the nice guy all his life, and look where it's gotten him. It's got him nothing. So he plots to, I think, rob a bank or something like that, and it's just like kind of his compromise throughout the book. But then the ending of the book, he kind of like realizes his error and stuff. And I remember reading the book and being like, wow, this was like worth the whole book, the ending. And now I look back and all I can remember about the book, I do remember the ending, but all I can remember about the book is all the things I didn't like and how many times John Steinbeck described a woman's butt as pert. It happens a lot in this book. Like, it's very repetitive and it always feels weird to me. Descriptions of women's bodies a lot of times in books seem weird to me anyway, especially books that are written by men, because a lot of times it's just, I don't know, it just feels weird. But in this case, it just felt so repetitive and strange, and just like there was nothing really very likable about this book. I think I might have rated it 4 stars on Goodreads, and I would rate it 2 now. And that's a big decline. That's saying a lot for a Steinbeck book. I've even reread my description for it, where I talk about how I couldn't help but root for the main character even though he's making bad choices. And I think back and I'm like, I feel like really annoyed thinking about that character now. So I don't really know what I was talking about. And lastly, I'm going to talk about it's really more of a series that I read last year. It's a YA series. I can't remember what the series is called. I'll put it on the screen. I'll look it up. The first book is Fireborn, and I can't even remember. I think Flamefall is book 2, written by Rosario Munda. And there were things that I did really love about this book, and I still do think are interesting. I liked, there's a color-based class system, and certainly echoes of Revolution, Russian Revolution in particular, was clearly a influential time period in writing these books. But when I read them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Well, actually, it took me a while to get it to Fireborn, but book 2 I actually almost gave 5 stars to. I think I gave it 4.5 because there's a lot of miscommunication trope and angstiness, and that is the only thing that brought that book down for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to wait so long for the last book. And now I'm just like, will I even read the last book? I don't even know. I don't even know if I really care how it ends. And again, I didn't hate these books, so I'm not like, oh my gosh, this is a favorite book and now I give it 1 star. It was like, oh my gosh, I loved these books and now I'm like, they were 3 star. They're kind of forgettable. I don't remember the main characters' names. I remember a twist kind of at the end of book 2 that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to wait so long to find out what's going on with this. And now I'm like, I'm fine if I never find out, you know? So it was more like they were a fun ride, but there was nothing meaty or impactful to me that I'm just like, oh, I'm still thinking about that. And obviously there can be books that you think are super fun and you rate them 5 stars and they stay 5 stars because you're like, wow, that was really fun. I look forward to rereading them. But I don't know that I feel the same way about this series. I tend to enjoy deep character work, and I think that these books tried to have deep character work, but ultimately I don't know that I connected all that much with the characters when it hasn't even been a year later and I don't remember very much about them. I think that the world was really interesting, and maybe I will read book 3, but I actually owned book 1 and book 2, and I bought book 2 brand new and paid full price for it. And I got rid of them in January, which was a little painful because I didn't get them super cheap. The first book I did get used, but I still paid $10 for it. And the second one I didn't pay full price for, and it was a hardcover and everything. And now I'm just like, oh, I should have asked my library to get it because my library didn't have it. And I feel like it's a YA series that YA age would really, really love. But I think, again, I'm kind of aging out of where I enjoy reading about serious angst, and now I just get annoyed by it. So when I think about book 2, I think about how annoyed I was by the miscommunication in it more than I think about how interesting the plot was or the revolution or anything like that. So this is a case where ultimately I'm like, well, the book was fine, and I think some people would really love it. I don't regret reading it. Some of these books, I feel like The Winter of Our Discontent, I look back and I'm like, why? Why did I even read that? And actually I feel the same way with If I Run also, because I disliked the rest of the series so much that I think it tainted book 1 a lot for me. But Fireborn, I don't regret reading it, and I actually buddy read it with some people, which was fun. So it was an enjoyable reading experience, but is it a life-changing, this is a new favorite series, I rated this 5 stars? No, and I almost, like I said, I think book 2 was 4.5 stars, and now I'd drop it down to a 3 because ultimately it just hasn't stuck with me. So these are the books that I rated more highly, and now I would rate them a bit lower. Some of them it's just a star drop. Some of them it's like, oh, it was fun. And now I'm like, oh, they were kind of forgettable. I think there's only 1 or 2 on here that were just very much like kind of ranty reviews. And one of them I think I might get a little flack for in the comments if I run. I feel like I'm probably gonna get some flack for that. But that's okay, we can have different opinions. That is the wonderful thing about books, is that there's so many different genres and different types of book written for so many different people to enjoy. So don't all have to like the same things. I know I read a lot of classics that a lot of my booktube friends are like, that's really boring and I couldn't get through it. So, you know, we all have different opinions and that's totally fine. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. What are some books that you have read that initially you're like, wow, this book is so great, and then over time you're just like, actually it kind of wasn't. Really didn't stick with me. Either it was mediocre or maybe you even dislike it now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.